Peter and Andrew lived together, it says in Mark 1:29, and no doubt they shared everything. And especially did Andrew want to share with him the Messiah. And so from this very beginning, he becomes a part of that intimate four. In fact, if you study through the New Testament, it's James and Peter and John, and Peter, James, and John and Peter and James. They're always the inner circle, and nobody is ever let into that inner circle except when Andrew gets in, and it's Peter, James, John, and Andrew. He was in the most intimate four, but he never quite cracked that inside three. But he was greatly respected. In fact, Philip, who was in group 2, a little less intimate with the Lord, one time had some Greeks come to him and say, "We want to see Jesus." And you know where Philip took them? He took them to Andrew. Why? Because I guess Philip thought that if you want to get to Jesus, all you got to do is get to Andrew. Andrew was intimate with Jesus. And Andrew was respected. And even yet, he still isn't in the inner three. But all of a sudden, in the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John, Andrew begins to emerge from the background. And we see Andrew 3 times in the Gospel of John. And all 3 times, Andrew is doing the same thing. It's easy to characterize him. The first time is in John chapter 1, verse 40, which I just reported to you. It says in John 1:40, one of the 2 who heard John the Baptist speak, and that would be John and Andrew, followed him. And he was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. And by the way, Andrew is always called Simon Peter's brother, with I think 1 or 2 exceptions. Maybe just 1. That's always how he's identified. And he first findeth his own brother Simon, and saith unto him, "We have found the Messiah," which is being interpreted to Christ, the Anointed One. And he brought him to Jesus. Now, if you want to know how to characterize the life of Andrew, it's very simple. He is the one who was always bringing people to Jesus. The second time we see him is in the 6th chapter of John and the 8th and 9th verse. A vast multitude of people are gathered. Jesus is teaching. It's late in the day. The crowd is hungry. There's not enough food, and Andrew brings to Jesus this time a little boy. And the little boy has 5 loaves and 2 fish. It doesn't mean 5 big loaves of bread. It means 5 little flat barley crackers and 2 fish, and they would take those fish and they would pickle them. And they would eat them with the crackers. So he brought a little fellow with 5 barley crackers and 2 pickled fish. He brought him to Jesus. I guess Andrew must have thought that the Lord could make a whole lot out of a very little. The third time we meet him is in John 12. And I've already alluded to that incident. And in John chapter 12 and verse 20, Philip is approached by the Greeks or the Gentiles, and they want to see Jesus. And Philip tells Andrew, and together they went to Jesus. The assumption being that they took the folks there too. So whenever you see Andrew, he's involved in finding Jesus so that Jesus can meet someone. Bringing people to Jesus. I guess maybe he didn't think there was anybody that Jesus didn't want to see. Or there was anything Jesus couldn't respond to. Or there was any problem Jesus couldn't solve. Because he's characterized as the one who brought men to Christ. Now, in these 3 incidents, if I can just sort of draw some pictures for you. In these 3 incidents, several things become clear. First of all, we see Andrew's openness. He knew that they were to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He knew that primarily it was the Jew first and then to the Gentile. And yet he also got the Spirit of our Lord, because the Lord originally had revealed his messiahship to a half-breed Samaritan woman. So Andrew was never choked by a hyper-Judaism. I mean, he didn't have any problem at all with bringing some Gentiles to Jesus. Well, we sense a little of the openness of his heart. There just wasn't anybody outside. There wasn't anybody that he didn't think Jesus would not want to see. We also see his faith. He had a simple faith. I don't know what he was thinking when he brought those 5 crackers and 2 fish with such a huge crowd. I don't know what he was trying to do, running around looking for whoever had a lunch. But he must have had some kind of faith to believe that the Lord could do something with that. After all, he had seen Jesus make wine. Why couldn't he make food? A third thing we see is not only his openness and his faith, but we see his humility. I mean, he spent his whole life being known as Simon Peter's brother. You can believe it. And now when he found the Messiah, there might have been a temptation to say, boy, now I'm not telling Peter. This is my chance to be somebody. But no, he runs to get Peter, knowing full well that as soon as Peter enters the group, he will run the group. Because that's Peter. And Andrew will be right back where he's always been as Simon Peter's brother. But he thought more of the work to be done than who was in charge. He thought more of the cause of the eternal virtue of the kingdom than he did of his personal and petty problems. Sad to say, but there are some people who won't play in the band unless they can beat the big drum. James and John had that problem, didn't they? But not Andrew. I don't find Andrew fighting about who's going to get the glory in the kingdom. You see, Andrew is the picture of all those who labor quietly in humble places. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Andrew is not the pillar like Peter, James, and John. He is a humbler stone. He could have anticipated the sentiment of the poet Christina Rossetti, who wrote, "Give me the lowest place, not that I dare ask for that lowest place, but thou hast died that I might live and share thy glory by thy side. Give me the lowest place, or if for me the lowest place is too high, then make one more low, where I may sit and see my God and love him so." That's Andrew. I mean, after all, he was one of the original two called, and yet he wasn't in the inner three, but it didn't seem to bother him. He was always Peter's brother. He was one of those rare people who's willing to take second place. One of those rare people who wants to be in support. One of those rare people who doesn't mind being hidden as long as the work is done. He's the kind of man that all leaders depend on. He's the kind of person that everyone knows is the backbone of every ministry. The cause of Christ is dependent, beloved, on self-forgetting souls who are content to occupy a small sphere and an obscure place free from self-seeking ambition, and yet he will sit on the throne judging the tribes of Israel.